Hello and welcome to my Module 3 script narration. The script I will be narrating for this project will be a script over the Cassini probe mission to Saturn. Now, historically, this was a very controversial mission for several reasons, but just so people know, there are 3 parts of the script, but I will only be narrating part 3 of the script because I've tried several recordings several times on this and I cannot get it to fit within 15 minutes otherwise. But I will give you a brief recap over what part 1 is and part 2. Part 1 basically just talks about what happened during the launch and why it was a controversial mission and how it ultimately exited the terrestrial planets. Part 2 was a little bit of a summarization of the forces that allowed the Cassini probe to exit the solar system, and we will see that in a moment. And part 3 right here is as Cassini has exited the terrestrial planets and is moving towards Saturn right now. This launch, by the way, took place in 1997, for anyone who wants to know that. Part of the reason why I chose to do a narration over this particular script was because if people remember our Module 2 discussion about sending a probe outside the solar system, I found this to be very comparable to what has happened in that discussion, because essentially what we talked about was sending something like the Cassini probe right here outside the solar system. But this is a lot more complicated than that, because despite using the same forces that the Cassini probe actually managed to get to the gas giants, which was its journey basically was launched from Earth, went around Venus, and if you remember Kepler's laws about how the elliptical orbit of the planets made them faster as they looped around closer, when they were closer to the sun, they gained momentum. The same thing was for the Cassini probe, and they used that momentum to launch off of Venus and then ultimately get on a little bit more of a boost from Earth to get outside of the terrestrial planets and off to Jupiter. But this is a little more complicated in the module discussion because they're aiming for a particular planet, and that planet is Saturn. So it's a lot harder, almost not quite as hard as like saying trying to hit a needle in a haystack, for instance, but it's still very difficult. And I find the kind of work it probably took to actually get the calculations for this trip correct, and you will see that here in just a minute, to be very difficult. You see those red lines is the actual, this red line is the actual journey of the Cassini probe to Saturn right here. And the blue planets are the orbit of the planets. Once I get control again, I will see if I can get a view of Saturn at this point. We should be right by Saturn, I think. Nope, not yet. Okay, we should be. Where is it? Ah, there it is. That is a beautiful Saturn just as Cassini has entered its orbit. The timing it took to probably actually get this to work was very difficult. As I said, it's probably a lot harder to actually time the Cassini probe to actually make it to Saturn during its rotation around the sun than it is to just send outside of the solar system. Because, I mean, when you're sending just outside the solar system, it can go in pretty much any direction, so long as it's not caught by another celestial object. Like they were trying to get this Cassini probe to get caught by the gravitational pull of Saturn right here. Now, as we're going past Saturn here, you will see, I'll get to a better view of what these lines are, but the red lines are the various other objects that are moving around Saturn right now. The light green lines, as you see passing by right there, are the moons of Saturn's orbit, and the dark blue, just ignore those. Those are other planets. We will get a better view of this in a little bit, but I mean, this is just a beautiful view as well. And you will see I will explain the importance of these lines in a little bit once we get a better angle. I have been over the script, and I know we'll get a better angle soon enough. But for now, just taking the beautiful view of our planet Saturn. And to think, those moons we have right there of Saturn, the rings of Saturn, at least from what I remember from our reading, was countless celestial objects that have just been crashing into each other and have broken up right in Saturn's atmosphere. So there's all kinds of possibly old moons or other stuff like hydrogen compounds. Just that's what makes up the rings, and it's pretty interesting how long it would have taken for those rings to actually form. That was one thing I was curious about when I was thinking through the script. Yeah, I can't go. Oh, there we go. We'll be also orbiting around some of Saturn's moons in this recording. We'll get to that in a little bit, though. Is it now the time? Yes, right here. Now, if you look a little, well, hold on. Yes, if you look at the way some of these contour lines are moving around, or there are all orbital around Saturn. These are various the red lines, as I said, are various celestial objects that are just caught by the gravitational pull of the planet Saturn and have become satellites around it, just like the rings of Saturn, the moons, and ultimately the Cassini probe we are watching from the point of view of right here. And it's very interesting how many different objects were actually caught by it. It's like in the reading that we did of how or at least in the video we watched of how the fifth gas giant actually got caught by the planet Jupiter. Here's an example of so many other celestial bodies and stuff that got caught by the gravitational pull of a gas giant. Oh, there goes Jupiter. And right there is the moon Titan we are passing by right now. There's its orbit right there. If there's one thing I wish this program Celestia did a little bit better job at was getting the textures a little bit better. Although this script was nice in providing background information of deep space objects that you saw right over there. I thought that was a nice touch for this script as we were passing by, because it helps me identify the various moons and stuff. Where are the names, though? I'm pretty sure with the moons names are here somewhere. But yeah, this is just interesting. I mean, look at how many different rings are. It's a little bit hard to tell like what's different from what, but these are all different bodies that have been caught, or different celestial objects that have been caught by Saturn. And you can see the orbit around them as they're really close, at least from this point of view. Right there towards Saturn, and their orbit ending up right over here. It's very similar to our own planets as they orbit around the Sun. And yeah, that was pretty interesting to see how even that other objects that orbit around the planets, particularly the gas giants, can have the same kind of elliptical orbit around the planets as they do as the planets have around our Sun. And here's a nice viewpoint of the different moons that are around Saturn. I can't remember how to get the names going, but yeah, these are the various moons that orbit Saturn. And the ones that are extremely close were broken apart at some point from impacts, and that's what created the rings. At this point, they've already deployed the probe towards the planet Titan as we passed by just a little bit ago. And it looks like we're going to be having a little bit of a break here in the script. Oh wait. But yeah, it looks like it's just gonna be talking about the rest of the mission on how Cassini ended up deploying various probes to the different moons around that orbit Saturn. So I will come back once we get a little bit closer to the end of the script, and I will let you know if anything interesting happens. I'll be sure to come back on. Alright, so nothing else particularly interesting happened that was in relation to what I've been talking about how the Cassini probe was launched out of the terrestrial planets, or how and ultimately managed to get to Saturn. Nothing interesting happened in terms of that, or how does these other space objects or the moons of Saturn were in relation to their elliptical orbit around Saturn, in relation to how the planets were have an elliptical orbit around the sun itself. So, in the end, I would say the important things that I found interesting about this script is how they actually were able to time this just right to get the probe Cassini sent out of the terrestrial planets by gathering enough speed around the terrestrial planets of Venus and Earth to actually get out and make it towards Saturn at just the right time in its orbit around the sun. This was probably a very difficult task in actually completing, and I can only imagine what kind of effort and calculation must have put into that to actually get this done. But it really gives you a little bit of a insight to what it would be like to actually travel outside of, or travel just in space in general, and try to intercept with various celestial bodies, like the planet Saturn in this case, in this script. On top of that, it gives us a little bit more of an insight to what it was we talked back about in our Module 2 discussion about sending probes out into space, about whether we're just sending it out into space in general, or if we're trying to reach a certain place. This was a very good script to actually help give a little bit more detail on the matter. But at the same time, as I mentioned, I found it very interesting, at least with the front lines representing different celestial objects, such as just maybe meteors, asteroids, rocks, comets, or whatever, that got caught by the gas giant's orbit. It reminded me of the video we watched before doing this project, or narration of our own script, of how at least in that guy's simulation, the fifth gas giant got caught by Jupiter's orbit. This is another example of different celestial bodies with lower mass getting caught by other celestial bodies with bigger mass. And it's interesting I found it interesting how they ended up creating elliptical orbits around the planet Saturn in this case. Very similar to our own orbit around the sun with the planets in our solar system. But yeah, that was my narration of this Cassini mission script, and I hope to talk to you all another day. Farewell.